Can we reconcile these opposing views of strategy as design and strategy as emergence? Is there some common ground among them? And what does all of this mean with regards to the strategy of Tesla? That's what we want to explore in our concluding video. So first of all, we want to reconcile or attempt to reconcile the tension between strategy and design, or as design and emergence. And in the end, we are summarizing the key insights of the session on crafting strategy processes. When we put strategy as design and strategy as emergence side by side, then it seems that the two conceptions of strategy are opposing, are incompatible with each other. If we sort of look at some of the attributes, then we see that a design view of strategy highlights this idea that strategies are intentionally designed ex ante, that they're about figuring out what the future will hold, that they are about forecasting and anticipating the future. And given that we think that we can anticipate the future, we'll be happy to make strategic commitments. It's a very structured, comprehensive approach to strategy, one that is hierarchical in nature and that focuses on the optimal allocation of resources. So very much a top-down approach towards strategy. Strategy as emergence in many ways seems to be the opposite, right? That strategy is not intentionally designed, but gradually shaped over time. We're not able to figure out the future, but we're simply finding it out as we're experiencing it. And the future will always remain partially unknown. That's the key assumption of strategy as emergence. So when there's uncertainty, it might be a smart thing to actually postpone our commitments until the point when the uncertainty has been reduced. So the formation of strategy might appear much more unstructured and much more fragmented than in the design view. Strategy is, according to the view of strategy as emergence, also a much more dispersed process where actors actually are in many different places of the organization. And rather than focusing on optimal resource allocation, experimentation is really the capability that will make a difference in a view of strategy as emergence. And it will be implemented not top-down, but bottom-up. So it looks incompatible, right? The two conceptions look incompatible. They're opposing ends of the spectrum. But is that actually true? Can we see elements of both in actual practice? And in that regard, we can ask the question, which of the two schools provides, if any, a more accurate account of Tesla's strategy as we've seen it, and as you maybe know it from your own reading? Well, if we look at Tesla, if we look at Tesla's three-step master plan, if we look at how this three-step master plan was then translated into the product portfolio over time, then it very much looks like strategy as design, right? This idea that we can ex ante develop a good understanding of how the e-mobility space will develop, we can understand a suitable position they're in, and we will then execute that smoothly, right? But the truth is that while that master plan was carefully executed, there was also a considerable amount of uncertainty. There were problems that Tesla needed to overcome. They were close to bankruptcy. They needed to improvise on the way. There were new opportunities to the left and right that opened up as they decided, for instance, to take over Solar City and enter the segment of solar roof panels, as they engaged in the partnership with Panasonic to manufacture lithium-ion batteries, as they decided in the late 2020 to become a battery manufacturer themselves. So there was lots of not just ex-ante design, but also attentiveness towards emerging opportunities and the ability to seize these opportunities as they emerged. So to me, there's a good element of strategy as design in Tesla's strategy, but also experimentation, learning, and openness to opportunities as they emerge. And in a more stylized way, we can conceptualize the tension between design and emergence and the way in which we can reconcile them in the way depicted here on this slide. So we have the two arguably opposing views of strategy as design and strategy as emergence. This idea that a strategist needs to be some sort of architect, which is good at planning and good at rational choice. But we also need to have, as a strategist, this component of a pattern recognizer, this component of a student, that we are able to respond to emerging external and internal events. And strategy will now be shaped by these two parts of the personality, if you want, of strategists. So the architect part, the design part, will be very good at helping us to come up with our intended strategy. But what we all need to have in mind is that every intended strategy will become in part unrealized. There will be parts of our strategy that will never find its way into actual practice, for good reasons or for bad ones. So it will only be a part of our intended strategy that will contribute to the realized strategy. And that part is what we call the deliberate strategy. So the realized strategy, the strategy we ultimately end up as an organization, is influenced by that intended strategy, by the strategist as architect. But at the same time, the pattern recognition element comes into play. As external and internal events unfold, we are detecting opportunities and threats, and we are responding to them. We make our strategy adaptive over time. And this gives us the emergent part of our strategy. And the deliberate part and the emergent part, they both then form our realized strategy. So that's, I think, very important to keep in mind. Strategies typically are neither simply ex ante designed, nor simply ex post, that is retrospectively formalized. Strategies typically have an intentional argument and a learning or element and a learning element. So when we design strategy processes, and that's the key message, I think, when we're designing strategy processes, we need a design element. We basically need to have guidelines that frame, so to say, our learning and our experimentation. Design and learning needs to be not mutually exclusive, but jointly reinforcing, if you want. Then we are leveraging the best of both worlds of a design view of strategy and an emergence view of strategy. So coming to the end of this session on crafting strategy processes, what have we done together? Well, first of all, we looked at the strategy concept. You remember that we went back to the first usages of strategy in the military context, strategy as the art of leading an army. We then moved towards the organizational domain and saw that strategy has very different facets. We learned that strategy has an element of planning, positioning, of providing a perspective, and also of identifying patterns in our activities. We then moved to strategy evolution. We talked about the research objectives of strategy, the global research landscape, and we identified how strategy research and practice evolved over time, shifting from a focus on planning and processes towards the characteristics of the industry, the nature of our resources and capabilities, and collaborative arrangements such as networks and ecosystems. As for strategy processes, we discussed, first of all, the dominant conception of the strategy process, that very linear model of strategy. We identified three fallacies: the fallacy of prediction, the fallacy of detachment, and the fallacy of formalization. And we then moved towards strategy schools, and we saw that there's not just the dominant view of strategy, there's not just the design school view of strategy, there are a number of alternatives. One extreme point is strategy as emergence, the learning school. And we compared and contrasted the two, and we then saw that actually, in practice, strategy as design and strategy as emergence, even though they seem incompatible, can be reconciled, can go hand in hand. Overall, the hope is that in this session we've come to understand the concept of strategy, and we're now equipped to craft strategy processes in our own organization and in other organizations. Many thanks.